Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time. Not to a battlefield, not to a king's court, but somewhere far more intimate and, in its own way, far more dangerous inside the mind and body of a 19th century woman. It's a journey into a world of lace, gaslight, and unspoken rules, where your own feelings could become your greatest enemy. A fair warning, based on the historical odds. You might not make it through this experience with all your rights or organs intact. Just kidding. Mostly. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all listening from tonight. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always a quiet thrill to see this little community scattered across the globe, all settling in together. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into 2 nights' journey together. The first thing you notice is the pressure. It's a constant, unyielding presence around your middle. You take a breath, but it's a shallow one, stopped short by the rigid wall of your corset. This is your reality. The hollow bone and steel cage you are laced into every single morning. It's supposed to give you the fashionable silhouette, a tiny waist, an elegant posture, but what it really does is remind you of your boundaries, both physical and social. You are standing in your parlor. The air is thick with the scent of polished wood, beech rocks, and a faint hint of coal smoke from the fireplace. Outside, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on cobblestones is a familiar, rhythmic percussion to your day. You look at your own hands, pale and soft. They are not the hands of a woman who toils, they are the hands of a lady of a certain standing. They know how to play the pianoforte, how to execute delicate embroidery, and how to hold a teacup just so. They do not know how to earn a living, sign a contract, or cast a vote. Your world is a beautifully decorated, well-upholstered prison. Your father, and one day your husband, is the warden. He is kind, you suppose. He ensures you are fed, clothed in the latest fashions, and kept safe from the grimy, dangerous world outside. But he also dictates the books you read, the people you meet, and the thoughts you are permitted to express. Excitement, passion, intellectual ambition, these are not considered virtues. They are unbecoming, almost vulgar. Did a woman. Your purpose is to be gentle, poised, and, above all, pleasing. Here's a little detail of your world: communication is a minefield of subtlety. In a crowded ballroom, where speaking your mind is out of the question, your fan becomes your voice. A slow, languid fanning motion might signal your indifference, while a quick, fluttery snap could betray your agitation. Tapping it against your lips is a silent plea for a private word. This entire, intricate language exists because your real voice is so often silent. It's a clever coping mechanism, a tiny rebellion encoded in a lady's accessory. Today, you feel a certain restlessness. It's a familiar hum beneath the surface of your carefully maintained composure. You've just finished a novel, one that your father would certainly disapprove of, full of heroines with a little too much spirit and ideas a little too grand. You hide it beneath a cushion on the settee, your heart thumping a little faster. This small act of defiance feels both thrilling and terrifying. You stare out the window at the people passing by. The men striding with purpose, the working-class women scurrying with bundles. They seem to have a direction, a reason, and you are waiting for a suitable husband, waiting for your life to truly begin, waiting for, you don't even know what. And this is where the trouble starts. This vague dissatisfaction, this nameless yearning, it has no place in your prescribed life. There is no name for it, no acceptable outlet. Historians still debate just how deeply women of your time internalize these suffocating roles. Were you a willing participant in this gilded cage, finding security and comfort in its predictability, or did you, like so many others whose stories are lost to time, feel a constant, simmering frustration just beneath the surface of your serene smile? That feeling, that unnamed turmoil inside you, is a seed of chaos in a world that demands order. And soon, the men of science and medicine will give it a name. A very convenient, all-encompassing name. That restlessness you feel has a name, though you don't know it yet. For now, it's just a quiet, persistent hum of wrongness. It's the feeling of wearing shoes that are exquisitely made, universally admired, but are just a size too small, pinching you with every step. The shoe you are meant to fit into is a very specific one. It's an ideal, whispered in sermons, immortalized in poetry, and praised in newspapers. They call it the angel in the house. The phrase comes from a wildly popular poem of the era, and it has become a kind of cultural shorthand for the perfect woman. And what does this angel do? She floats, rather than walks, through the halls of her home. Her domain is strictly domestic. The outside world, the world of commerce, politics, and industry, is a filthy, corrupting place, unfit for her delicate sensibilities. Her home is her sanctuary and her kingdom. Pure, she is the gentle, guiding spirit. She is endlessly patient, eternally kind. Her own needs, desires, and opinions are secondary, dissolved into the needs of her husband and children. She is the moral compass, the source of comfort, the quiet, beating heart of the family. Her purity is her most prized possession, and her greatest power is her self-sacrifice. You see this ideal everywhere. You see it in the paintings on the wall, depicting serene mothers bathed in soft light, surrounded by cherubic children. You hear it in the way your father speaks of your late mother as a saintly, perfect creature who never raised her voice. You feel it in the heavy silence that falls over the dinner table if you dare to offer a strong opinion on anything more controversial than the weather. You are to be a decorative object, a source of peace, a creature of feeling rather than intellect. Here's a curious detail of your time. This ideal was so pervasive that it spawned its own literary genre, the Conduct Manual. These were best-selling books, essentially instruction guides for being the perfect angel. They offered advice on everything from how to manage servants to how to arrange flowers. But their real purpose was to mold your character. One popular guide might instruct you that in conversation, a woman should never seem to know more than her male companions. Another might warn that boisterous laughter is unladylike and that a gentle, tinkling laugh is far more pleasing. You are taught to be the emotional shock absorber of the household, to soothe your husband's brow when he returns from the stressful world of business, and to never, ever burden him with your own anxieties or complaints. It's a comprehensive education in the art of self-erasure. This relentless pressure to be perfect, to be this angel, creates a profound internal conflict. You want to be good. You want to be loved and approved of. You dutifully practice your needlepoint, creating intricate tapestries of pastoral scenes, even as your mind wanders to the adventurous plot of your hidden novel. You smile placidly and agree with your father's pronouncements on politics, while a spark of rebellion flickers in your chest. This creates a gap, a chasm between the placid, agreeable woman you perform to the world and the complex, questioning person you are in private. And this is where the academic debate still rages. Historians argue about the true nature of this experience. Did women of your era fully embrace the role of the angel in the house, finding genuine power and fulfillment in being the undisputed queen of the domestic sphere? Some evidence suggests they did. A well-run household was a complex enterprise, and the woman who managed it wielded significant influence. Or was it, as other historians argue, a sophisticated form of psychological imprisonment, a role so deeply internalized that women became their own jailers, policing their own thoughts and feelings to conform to an impossible standard? The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the murky middle. For you, in this moment, the strain is beginning to show. It's not in any grand, dramatic gesture. It's in the small things. The sudden bout of weeping that comes over you for no discernible reason. The sharp, irritable retort you bite back just in time. The feeling of a knot tightening in your stomach when you think of the endless, identical days stretching out before you. You are not a perfect, placid angel. You are a human being, and in your world, that simple fact is becoming a problem. Your very personality, with its inconvenient shades of passion and intellect, is starting to look less like a character trait and more like a symptom of a looming, shadowy illness that the medical world is all too eager to diagnose. This sickness, this convenient label for your inconvenient feelings, has a name. It's whispered in concerned tones between your father and the family doctor. It's used to explain the eccentricities of a neighbor or the sudden decline of a distant cousin. The word is hysteria. And in your time, it is an epidemic, but it's an epidemic of the soul, a ghost in the machine of womanhood. It's not a disease in the way you might think of one today, with a clear cause and predictable symptoms. Hysteria is the great, shadowy wardrobe of 19th century medicine. It's where a doctor can hang any female behavior he doesn't understand or approve of. It is, perhaps, the most useful word in his vocabulary. Its symptoms are a masterpiece of vagueness, a sprawling, contradictory list that could, at one point or another, describe nearly any woman alive. Let's look at the checklist. Shall we? Are you prone to anxiety or nervousness hysteria? Do you suffer from a loss of appetite hysteria? Do you have too much of an appetite also hysteria? Other telltale signs include shortness of breath, a feeling of a lump in the throat, irritability, and a tendency to cause trouble. This last one is particularly useful. Causing trouble can mean anything from disagreeing with your husband to expressing a desire for an education. Even the simple act of reading novels, especially the sensational kind you have hidden under the settee cushion, is often cited as a trigger for a hysterical episode. The mind, you see, is too fragile for such stimulation. Here's a bizarre but telling little fact for you. The list of potential symptoms for hysteria was once compiled and included over 75 pages of possibilities. It was so extensive that it included both sexual desire and a lack of it, emotional outbursts and emotional coldness, sleeps and sleeping too much. Essentially, any deviation from a state of placid, silent obedience could be framed as a medical problem. The diagnosis wasn't about identifying a pathology, it was about enforcing a norm. You start to second-guess yourself. The tightness in your chest as you sit through another stifling. Silent dinner is at a symptom. The flash of anger you felt when your brother was praised for his ambition while you were told to be content was that a sign of the illness taking hold. The world begins to feel like a trap. Your own body, your own mind, is no longer a safe place. It could betray you at any moment, manifesting a symptom that could lead to a doctor's visit, a dreaded diagnosis, and a life of prescribed confinement. You hear the whispers about other women, Mrs. Albright, down the lane, who has not left her darkened room in months, suffering from her nerves. Your cousin Eliza, who was sent to a health spa in the countryside after she refused a very suitable marriage proposal. No one says the word hysteria out loud, but it hangs in the air, a shared and terrifying understanding. It's a threat that keeps the social order intact. And here, in the quiet corridors of history, a debate still whispers among academics. Were the doctors of your era deliberately malicious? Were they consciously using this diagnosis as a tool of oppression to keep women in their place? The answer is complicated. Some undoubtedly were. But for many, they were simply men of their time, operating within a deeply ingrained cultural framework that viewed women as inherently weaker, more emotional, and less rational. They genuinely believed they were helping. They saw a woman acting outside her prescribed role and interpreted it, not as a sign of a restrictive society, but as a malfunction of her fundamental biology. They weren't necessarily evil, they were profoundly, dangerously ignorant, armed with an unshakable sense of their own authority. They saw a problem, and they were determined to cure it. The very word itself, hysteria, holds a clue to this fundamental misunderstanding. It's not a new word. It's ancient, pulled from the very beginnings of medicine, and its origins are far more literal and far more bizarre than you could possibly imagine. It points to a specific culprit within your body, a troublesome organ that the earliest doctors believed was the root of all female chaos. The cure, it would follow, must target the source. The name of your supposed illness, hysteria, isn't a product of the 19th century's gaslit laboratories or its burgeoning understanding of the nervous system. No, its roots are far deeper, twisting all the way back into the ancient world. The very word itself is a direct dispatch from the past. It comes from the Greek word hysteria, which means uterus or womb. And that, right there, is the entire theory in a nutshell. For centuries, going back to the time of the ancient Egyptians and Greeks, the wisest men of medicine believed in a truly spectacular idea: the wandering womb. Your uterus, they theorized, was not a fixed organ, anchored safely in place. They imagined it as a separate creature living inside you, a restless animal with a mind of its own. And when this creature grew discontented or lonely, it would detach itself and go on a little tour of your body in search of moisture or satisfaction. Imagine this for a moment. You feel a tightness in your chest, a sense of suffocation. To a doctor of antiquity, this wasn't anxiety. This was your womb, having packed its bags and traveled north, pressing up against your diaphragm. Do you feel a lump in your throat? A classic symptom of what they called globus hystericus. That's not a psychosomatic sensation, that's your womb knocking on the door of your larynx. Headaches, dizziness, fainting spells, or it could be explained by this internal nomad bumping into other organs and generally causing a ruckus. The proposed cures were just as literal. The primary goal was to coax the wayward womb back to its rightful home in the pelvis. How do you lure an animal with smells? Ancient physicians would employ a kind of two-pronged aromatic assault. They would have you inhale foul-smelling substances, things like burnt wool or acrid resins, to displease the uterus and drive it downward. Simultaneously, they would apply sweet-smelling perfumes and unguents to your nether regions, hoping to entice the wandering organ back to its proper station with the promise of a more pleasant environment. It was, in essence, an attempt to herd an internal organ with good and bad smells. Here's a peculiar little detail that highlights the absurdity. This belief was so entrenched that even the great philosopher Plato chimed in. He wrote that the womb is an animal within an animal that, when it remains barren for too long, becomes distressed and sorely disturbed, and begins to roam, blocking passageways, cutting off breath, and causing all manner of disease. So according to Plato, the ultimate cure for a wandering womb was, you guessed it, pregnancy. Getting married and having children would anchor the organ, giving it the purpose and contentment it so desperately craved. This wasn't just a medical theory, it was a philosophical justification for a woman's domestic destiny. Now, by your time in the 19th century, most sophisticated doctors would scoff at the literal idea of a physically migrating uterus. The science of anatomy had progressed enough to know that was impossible. However, the ghost of the idea remained. The core concept that a woman's emotional and physical health was inextricably and problematically linked to her reproductive organs was still the bedrock of medical thinking. The womb might not be physically wandering anymore, but it was still seen as the command center of female instability. They believed it exerted a kind of tyrannical influence over your entire system, sending out troublesome nervous signals that could disrupt the mind, agitate the heart, and fray the nerves. And this is a point where historical interpretation gets interesting. Many scholars argue that the wandering womb was never just a medical mistake. It was a powerful metaphor. It perfectly encapsulated the male-dominated society of femininity itself, irrational, untethered, and prone to internal chaos if not properly managed and anchored by a man. The theory explained away female discontent not as a legitimate response to social constraints, but as a biological malfunction. Your unhappiness wasn't a sign that something was wrong with the world, it was a sign that something was wrong with you. So when your family finally decides that your restlessness and your morbid love of novels are symptoms that need a professional opinion, the doctor who arrives at your door carries this entire legacy in his black leather bag. He may not believe your uterus is on a field trip to your spleen, but he absolutely believes it's the source of the problem. His gaze won't be one of open-minded inquiry. It will be one of searching for the confirmation of a foregone conclusion. He is not here to listen to you, he is here to diagnose your womb. The day the doctor comes is a formal affair. The house is tidied to within an inch of its life, and a hush falls over the parlor. He isn't just a physician, he is a figure of immense authority, a man of science in an age that worships progress. His word carries the weight of objective truth. When he arrives, his top hat and coat are taken by the maid, and he is ushered into the room where you sit, perched nervously on the edge of a velvet armchair. He is probably in his 50s, with a well-trimmed beard and an air of paternalistic confidence. He smells of antiseptic soap and starch. He doesn't address you directly at first. He speaks to your father, man to man, discussing your case as if you were a piece of complex but faulty machinery. They use words like delicate constitution, nervous sensitivity, and feminine rubbles. You sit in silence, your hands clasped tightly in your lap, feeling less like a patient and more like an exhibit. When he finally turns his attention to you, his questions are filtered through his own unshakable convictions. He asks about your sleep, your appetite, your menstrual cycle. He might ask if you are prone to bouts of melancholy or excitability. Every answer you give is noted not as a piece of your subjective experience, but as evidence for a pre-existing theory. If you admit to feeling sad, he nods knowingly. If you confess to feeling irritable, he nods again. It all fits. He is not solving a puzzle, he is simply connecting the dots he already drew in his mind before he even walked through your door. Let's take a look inside his medical bag. A microcosm of the era's medical mind. Alongside his stethoscope and a thermometer, you would find some rather peculiar items. There might be vials of tonics, most of which were high-proof alcohol mixed with opium or other sedatives, designed to soothe the nerves. You might see a small, polished hammer for testing reflexes, part of the new fascination with the nervous system. And then there are the more specialized tools, the ones used for a closer examination, kept discreetly out of sight for now. These are speculums and probes, cold and metallic, designed to investigate the very organ they believe to be the source of all your turmoil. Here's a little-known fact about the medical consultation of your time. A doctor's diagnosis was often based as much on social observation as on medical science. He would take in your surroundings, the books on your shelf, the quality of the furniture, the clothes you wore to make an assessment of your character and lifestyle. A home seen as too lavish or a dress seen as too flamboyant could be interpreted as signs of an unstable, excitable nature. Even your hobbies were subject to scrutiny. A passion for something deemed intellectually taxing, like studying languages or, heaven forbid, science, could be seen as a dangerous overstimulation of your fragile female brain, a direct cause of your hysterical symptoms. Your entire life becomes a collection of clues pointing toward a single, inevitable diagnosis. The doctor's authority is absolute, not just because of his scientific knowledge, but because of his social standing. He is a man, and you are a woman. He is educated, and you are not, at least, not in the same way. He holds a position of power in a world that has granted you very little. To question his judgment would be an act of profound social rebellion, an act that would, ironically, be seen as further proof of your hysteria. You are trapped in a perfect circular logic. There's an ongoing debate among medical historians about the precise nature of the doctor-patient relationship in these encounters. Was it purely an exercise of power, a cold, clinical classification of a lesser being, or was there, in some cases, a genuine, albeit misguided, attempt at empathy? Some doctors' case notes reveal a kind of frustrated sympathy, a recognition of real suffering in their female patients. They truly saw these women as sick and in need of help. The tragedy is that their help was filtered through a lens of such profound misunderstanding. They weren't trying to fix the woman, because they were incapable of seeing that it was the world around her that was broken. As the consultation draws to a close, the doctor straightens his waistcoat and delivers his verdict to your father. He speaks in calm, measured tones, confirming what everyone in the room already suspected. You have a clear case of female hysteria. It's a mild case, he assures your father, but one that requires immediate and careful management to prevent it from worsening. The diagnosis hangs in the air, heavy and suffocating, It is no longer just a feeling inside you, it is a fact. Certified by a man of science. Your identity has been rewritten. You are no longer just a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a restless heart. You are now, officially, a patient, and your treatment is about to begin. The diagnosis lands not like a bomb, but like a thick, woolen blanket, smothering the last embers of your protest, hysteria. The word, spoken with such calm authority, reframes your entire existence. Your secret love of challenging novels is no longer a sign of an inquisitive mind. It's a symptom of morbid intellectualism. Your moments of quiet melancholy are not a natural response to a constrained life, they are evidence of a pathological sadness. Your flashes of frustration are not righteous anger, they are fits of nervous irritability. The diagnosis is a label, but it works like a cage, built from the very fabric of your personality. Your father, relieved to have a name for your difficult behavior, accepts the doctor's pronouncement with a solemn nod. He sees it as a path forward, a way to restore peace and order to his household. For him, this is a medical issue, not a social one. He doesn't see the bars of the cage he has helped construct. He only sees a beloved daughter who is unwell and needs to be cured. He is not your enemy, not really. He is your warden, and he believes he is acting in your best interest. Let's look at the crimes that have led to your conviction. Your charge sheet would be a collection of everyday rebellions. Crime expressing a desire to attend university. Translation: a dangerous overreaching of the female intellect. A clear sign of a mind unhealthily detached from its proper domestic sphere. Crime: debating politics with your brother. Translation: a symptom of unfeminine aggression and a tendency to cause trouble. Crime: weeping after a marriage proposal from a man you find dull and repulsive. Translation: an irrational emotional outburst. A classic hysterical paroxysm. Crime: a lack of enthusiasm for needlepoint and other calm domestic arts. Translation: a restless spirit. An inability to be content. A core symptom of nervous disorder. Essentially, your crime is your failure to be the angel in the house. You have failed to be placid, submissive, and content with your lot. Then now, you will be sentenced. The diagnosis itself is the first part of the punishment. It strips you of your credibility. How can you argue against your treatment when the very act of arguing is considered a symptom of the disease you're being treated for? Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of medical opinion. If you protest, you are hysterical. If you calmly acquiesce, it proves the diagnosis was correct and the treatment is working. It's a flawless system of control. Here's a curious, and rather bleak, little detail from the era. The diagnosis of hysteria was disproportionately applied to women of the middle and upper classes, working class women, who labored in factories or as domestic servants, were rarely diagnosed. Why? They didn't have the time or luxury for such indulgent illnesses. A factory girl who fainted from exhaustion was just tired. A wealthy woman who fainted in her parlor was having a hysterical fit. This reveals the deep class bias of the diagnosis. Hysteria was, in many ways, a disease of leisure. A pathology invented to manage women who were not sufficiently occupied by manual labor and were, therefore, at risk of a far more dangerous activity: thinking. The historical debate around this is fascinating. Some feminist historians argue that in a world where women had no power, feigning illness or genuinely developing psychosomatic symptoms was one of the few tools they had to exert some control over their lives. A diagnosis of hysteria, while stigmatizing, could relieve a woman of unwanted social obligations. It could be a way to avoid a detested marriage, to escape the crushing boredom of social calls, or to garner attention and care in a world that otherwise ignored her needs. It was a desperate, double-edged sword. To get what you wanted, you had to accept a label that defined you as broken. For you, however, there is no sense of wielding power. There is only a quiet, creeping dread. The world, which already felt small, has now shrunk to the size of a sick room. The people around you, who once saw you as a person, now look at you with a mixture of pity and concern. seeing only your diagnosis. Your identity has been overwritten by a single word on a doctor's prescription pad. You are no longer the protagonist of your own life story. You are a case study. A patient whose cure is about to be meticulously planned and executed, whether you like it or not. The first prescription is not a pill or a tonic. It is an instruction. One that sounds deceptively gentle. You are to have rest. The first treatment prescribed for your newly diagnosed hysteria sounds almost pleasant. A welcome respite. It's called the rest cure. The name is a gentle deception, evoking images of serene afternoons spent on a chaise lounge with a cup of tea. The reality, as you are about to discover, is something far more clinical and isolating. It is not a vacation, it is a form of sensory deprivation. The rest cure was pioneered and popularized by a prominent American neurologist, Dr. S. Mitchell, who became the go-to physician for difficult women from wealthy families. His theory was that hysteria was caused by a depletion of a woman's nervous energy. Your mind and body were, in his view, overdrawn at the bank of vitality. The only way to replenish this account was through absolute, total, and info-stress. The goal was to shut down your system so it could reboot. Like a primitive computer. You are escorted to your bedroom, which is to be your entire world for the next 6 to 8 weeks. The curtains are drawn to keep the light dim and unstimulating. The windows are to be kept closed to muffle the sounds of the outside world. Your family is instructed not to visit you, except for brief, placid encounters. Their presence, it is believed, would be too exciting for your frayed nerves. You are to be completely isolated from your normal life. Your day is reduced to a simple, repetitive, and deeply monotonous schedule. You are confined to your bed. You are not allowed to sit up. You are not allowed to stand. You are not allowed to walk to the window. You are to lie flat on your back, conserving every last ounce of energy. A nurse, stern and deficient, is hired to be your guardian and attendant. She will wash you, feed you, and turn you over in bed as if you were an infant. And the rules are absolute. No reading, no writing, no sewing, no drawing. You are forbidden from any activity that might engage your mind. The novels you once cherished are locked away. Your journal and pen are removed from your bedside table. The very tools you used to process your thoughts and escape your reality are now deemed part of the disease. The doctor's orders are explicit. Your brain, like your body, must be in a state of complete repose. You are to do nothing but lie in the dim light and rest. Here's a bizarre and deeply ironic detail of the rest cure. While you, a woman of intellect and sensitivity, are being forced into this state of vegetative boredom, Dr. Mitchell prescribed the exact opposite for his male patients suffering from similar nervous complaints. For men experiencing what was then called neurasthenia, a sort of male equivalent of hysteria, he prescribed a vigorous regimen known as the West Cure. He would send them out to the American frontier to engage in cattle ranching, rough riding, and other strenuous, manly activities. So the cure for a man's nervous exhaustion was adventure and challenge. The cure for a woman's was to be infantilized and stripped of all stimulation. The emptiness of the days is staggering. You lie in the semi-darkness, tracing the patterns on the wallpaper with your eyes until you have them memorized. You listen to the muffled sounds of the household moving on without you, the distant clink of cutlery, the faint chime of the doorbell, the murmur of voices you cannot quite make out. You are a prisoner in your own room, and your sentence is boredom, the restlessness you felt before. The energetic hum of a mind wanting more has nowhere to go. It turns inward, churning on, curdling into a thick, grey sludge of despair. Academics are still fascinated by the psychology of the rest cure. Was it a genuine, if flawed, attempt at healing? Or was it a punitive measure designed to break a woman's spirit? The famous feminist writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who was subjected to the rest cure herself, wrote her masterpiece, The Yellow Wallpaper, as a direct result of her experience. In the story, the narrator, confined to her room, slowly descends into madness, projecting her own trapped psyche onto the patterns in the wallpaper. Gilman later said that she wrote the story to show drive, Mitchell the error of his ways and save other people from being driven crazy. You are not being cured, you are being broken. The treatment is designed to make you so utterly, desperately bored that the prospect of returning to your placid, normal life as a dutiful daughter or wife seems like a thrilling escape. It's a form of re-education through monotony. The goal is to make you docile, compliant, and so starved for any human interaction that you will agree to anything. After weeks of this, you are supposed to be reborn as a more manageable woman, your troublesome ambitions and passions smoothed away by the sheer weight of nothingness. The next step in this regimen will involve building you back up, but only with approved materials. As you lie in your darkened room, a ghost in your own home, the second phase of your cure begins. The doctor's theory is that after breaking you down to your most basic state, you must be carefully rebuilt. Your body, weakened by hysteria and now further softened by weeks of enforced idleness, needs to be fortified. This rebuilding process starts not with exercise or fresh air, but with your dinner plate. A new dietary regimen is introduced, as rigid and prescriptive as the rest of your treatment. The nurse, who has become the stoic gatekeeper of your world, now arrives not just with a wash basin, but with trays of food, and this food is unlike anything you are used to. Your diet is to be simple, bland, and incredibly repetitive. The goal is to nourish the body without, under any circumstances, stimulating the senses or passions. A flavorful meal, it is believed, could be just as dangerous as a sensational novel. Your menu is a litany of beige. You are given bowls of thin gruel, plain milk-toast stale bread softened in warm milk, and perhaps a little beef broth. There is no spice, no seasoning beyond a pinch of salt. The vibrant colors and rich tastes of a normal meal are gone, replaced by a palette of pale, uninspiring mush. You are being fed like an invalid, or more accurately, like a nun in a particularly austere convent. The very concept of enjoying your food is seen as a form of sensual indulgence that must be suppressed. The quantity of this bland food, however, is another matter entirely. As part of the rest cure, you are often force-fed. The nurse sits by your bedside, spooning milk and broth into your mouth, urging you to take more, and then more still. The goal is to make you gain weight. Dr. Mitchell believed that by adding pounds of flesh to a woman's frame, he could stabilize her nervous energy. A plump body was seen as a calm body. You are to be fattened up like a prize animal being prepared for show. Your increasing weight charted as a primary sign of your recovery. You are literally being rebuilt, layer by layer, into a more placid, substantial, and therefore healthier version of yourself. Here's a particularly strange little detail from the period's dietary obsessions. The sphere of stimulating foods was a mainstream preoccupation, championed by figures like John Harvey Kellogg. Yes, the cereal guy. Kellogg was a health guru who ran a famous sanitarium and believed that most of society's ills, from indigestion to sinful thoughts, could be traced back to a rich, spicy diet. He advocated for extreme blandness, inventing foods like cornflakes and granola as passion-killing alternatives. He believed that a plain diet would not only improve physical health, but would also promote moral purity and curb unhealthy desires. So, the bland food on your tray isn't just a medical prescription, it's part of a wider cultural crusade against pleasure. This forced diet is a profound violation. Another way your autonomy is stripped away. You have no say in what you eat or how much. Your body is no longer your own, it is a project being managed by others. The act of eating, once a source of pleasure and social connection, becomes another sterile, clinical procedure. You feel like a plant being methodically watered and fertilized. Your own more completely irrelevant to the process. Historians who study food and culture still debate the full implications of these prescribed diets. On one hand, there was a dawning, albeit primitive, understanding of the connection between nutrition and health. For some genuinely malnourished patients, this focus on regular feeding could have had some positive effects. But on the other, more sinister hand. Controlling a person's food is one of the most fundamental ways to control them, by dictating what goes into your body. The medical establishment was reinforcing its control over your entire being. The blandness was a metaphor they were trying to stamp out your flavor, your zest, your individuality, one spoonful of gruel at a time. As you lie there, passively consuming the prescribed meals, you feel a profound sense of detachment from your own body. It is growing softer, heavier, but it feels less like your own. The weight gain is celebrated by the doctor on his weekly visits. He pats your hand, congratulates you on your progress, and tells your father that the treatment is working beautifully. You are becoming calmer, more compliant. But inside, you feel a growing emptiness. They are not curing you. They are replacing you, burying the restless, curious person you once were under layers of prescribed flesh and suffocating boredom. And the most intimate, most invasive part of your cure is yet to come. After weeks of enforced rest in the diet of bland conformity, your treatment enters its most direct and, for you, most bewildering phase. The doctor has determined that the root of your hysterical condition, the lingering nervous tension that even the rest cure hasn't fully dissipated, stems from a specific physiological source. He calls it a congestive state in your pelvic region. The language is clinical, opaque, but it all points back to that same ancient culprit, your womb and its surrounding territory, still seen as the epicenter of all your emotional storms. To relieve this congestion, he prescribes a new therapy. It is to be administered in the privacy of his office or, in some cases, by a physician making the house call. The procedure is called a pelvic massage. The name itself is a sterile, medical euphemism for a process that is deeply personal and profoundly strange. You are taken to the doctor's clinic. It's a room that tries to be professional and calming, but the underlying atmosphere is one of cold anxiety. You are instructed to lie on an examination table, draped with a sheet to maintain a semblance of modesty. The doctor, maintaining his professional, detached demeanor, explains that he will perform a manual manipulation to relieve the hysterical paroxysm he believes is trapped within you. He speaks of it as if he were discussing the unblocking of a clogged drain. The goal of this treatment is to induce a state of release, a physical event that the medical literature of the time described as a hysterical crisis or paroxysm. The doctors observe that after this event, their patient's symptoms, the anxiety, the irritability, the weeping, would temporarily vanish. They would become calm, relaxed, and sometimes even euphoric. From their perspective, this was a clear success. They had located the physical manifestation of the illness and physically expelled it. They had, in their minds, cured the symptom. What they failed to understand, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the true nature of what they were doing. They were clinical, methodical, and entirely focused on the mechanical process. The patient's own experience of the procedure was considered irrelevant. Your feelings of confusion, embarrassment, or violation were not part of the medical equation. You are simply a body with a malfunction, and the doctor is the technician sent to fix it. Here's a small, but crucial, detail about the context of this procedure in the Victorian era. Female sexuality was so deeply repressed and pathologized that it was virtually invisible to the male medical establishment. The prevailing belief, held by many respected physicians, was that good or pure women did not experience sexual desire or pleasure. Therefore, the intense physical response they were inducing in their patients could not possibly be sexual in nature. They had to frame it in medical terms. The paroxysm was not an orgasm, it was the release of pent-up pathological energy. It was a symptom of a disease being cured, not a natural bodily function. This astonishing blind spot allowed them to perform this intimate procedure without any sense of contradiction. Historians are still untangling the complex web of ignorance, repression, and power that define these encounters. It's a subject that makes us deeply uncomfortable, because it sits at the bizarre intersection of medical care and profound intimacy, all conducted under a veil of clinical detachment. Some historians argue that this was a form of unconscious, medicalized abuse, a stark example of the male-dominated profession exerting ultimate control over the female body. Others suggest a more nuanced view, pointing out that for the doctors, this was a legitimate, if physically taxing, medical procedure recommended in their own textbooks. They were not, in their own minds, acting inappropriately. They were practicing medicine as they had been taught. For you, lie on the table. The experience is one of profound dissociation. You feel a deep sense of unreality, a chasm opening between your mind and your body. This man, this figure of authority, is manipulating you in the most personal way imaginable, all while discussing your nervous condition in dry, academic tones. He is not treating you, the person, he is treating your uterus. The therapy is considered a success. The paroxysm is achieved. You feel a wave of intense physical release, followed by a strange, floating calm. The doctor notes this in your file as a positive outcome. The congestion has been relieved. The treatment is working. He recommends a regular schedule of these sessions, perhaps once or twice a week, to keep your hysteria at bay. You are sent home feeling dazed, confused, and strangely peaceful. The cause of your sudden tranquility a medical mystery you are not equipped to solve. The pelvic massage, as bizarre as it seems, becomes a routine part of your life. It's a prescribed, clinical appointment, no different on the calendar from a visit to the dentist. Yet, this cure has an unintended consequence that the medical community hadn't fully anticipated. It is exhausting work for the doctor. Imagine the same from the physician's perspective. He is a respected man of science, but a significant portion of his workday is now dedicated to performing a physically demanding, repetitive manual task. A single treatment could take anywhere from a few minutes to over an hour to bring the patient to the required hysterical paroxysm. A doctor with a busy practice might have several female patients a day requiring this therapy. His hands would cramp. His wrists would ache. He would end his day tired, not from intellectual labor, but from sheer physical exertion. This was a genuine, documented problem. Medical journals and private letters from the period contained physicians' complaints about the tiresome nature of this work. They spoke of physician fatigue and the strain it placed on their practice. This wasn't just about physical tiredness, it was also about professional dignity. These were men who saw themselves as intellectuals, healers of the mind and body. And yet, here they were, engaged in a task that felt more manual than medical. They needed a solution. They needed a way to achieve the same therapeutic result, the paroxysm, but more efficiently and with less personal effort. The problem, as they saw it, was purely mechanical. The hand was an imperfect tool for the job. It was slow, it grew tired, and its application was inconsistent. What they needed was a machine, a device that could deliver a steady, consistent, and tireless vibration to the required area, automating the most laborious part of their job. The demand was there. The medical justification was firmly in place. All that was missing was the technology. Here's a fascinating, and often misunderstood, historical tidbit. The motivation behind the invention of the first mechanical vibrators was not commercial or sensual. It was born out of clinical necessity and professional convenience. It was a direct response to an epidemic of sore-handed doctors. They weren't trying to create a product for the home, they were trying to invent a better tool for the clinic. The goal was to medicalize and mechanize the process, saving the doctor's time and energy, while providing a more scientific and modern form of treatment. This quest for a labor-saving device perfectly aligned with the spirit of the age. The late 19th century was a whirlwind of invention. The telephone, the phonograph, the electric light bulb. It was a time when technological solutions were being found for every imaginable problem. If a machine could light a room or transmit a voice, why couldn't one cure hysteria? It was a logical, if deeply flawed, extension of the era's faith in progress. And so, doctors and inventors began to tinker. They were not working in secret, shadowy workshops. They were publishing their findings in respected medical journals. presenting their prototypes at medical conferences. This was not a fringe movement, it was mainstream medical innovation. The historical debate here often centers on intentionality. Were these doctors, in their quest for a machine, consciously trying to create a device for pleasure? The overwhelming evidence says no. Their own writings and the cultural context make it clear that they were operating within their bizarre, sexist paradigm. They genuinely saw vibration as a legitimate medical therapy, like hydrotherapy using water for treatment, or electrotherapy and using electricity. They were treating a palsy, icy congestion, not inducing a sexual response. The fact that the physical result was identical was a coincidence. They neatly filed away under hysterical paroxysm. This professional weariness, this collective sigh of tired physicians across the Western world, became the unlikely mother of invention. The problem was clear: tired hands. The solution was on the horizon: a machine that could do the work for them. The clinical demand would soon be met by industrial ingenuity, leading to the creation of a device that would have a history far stranger and more enduring than its inventors could have ever predicted. The age of manual treatment was about to give way to the age of the machine. The solution to the doctor's collective carpal tunnel syndrome did not arrive in a sleek, discreet package. The first medical vibrators were marvels of Victorian engineering, large, cumbersome, and unapologetically industrial. They were not designed for aesthetics or portability, they were designed for power and efficiency, born from the same world of steam, steel, and sputtering engines that was transforming the rest of society. One of the earliest and most successful models was invented by a British physician, Dr. Mortimer Granville. His device, which he called the Percocet or Granville's hammer, was essentially a small, vibrating mallet powered by a battery. It looked more like a tool for engraving stone than for treating a delicate medical condition. But his true innovation was recognizing the therapeutic potential of mechanical vibration and marketing it to his fellow physicians as a respectable medical instrument. However, the real workhorses of the clinic were the larger, more powerful models. Imagine stepping into an up-to-the-minute doctor's office around the turn of the century. In the corner of the room, you might see a contraption that looks like a piece of factory equipment. This is the Chattanooga, one of the most popular clinical models. It's a heavy, full-standing device, often made of ornate cast iron and polished oak, looking like a cross between a sewing machine and a drill press. A long, flexible arm extends from the main body, and at the end is a hard rubber applicator. The entire thing is powered by electricity or, in less modern clinics, by a steam engine or even a water turbine. When turned on, it would hum and vibrate with an industrial intensity that could be felt through the floorboards. The procedure was now far more scientific and hands-off. You would be positioned on the examination table, and the doctor, with the same professional detachment, would apply the vibrating applicator to the affected area. What once took an hour of manual effort could now be accomplished in a matter of minutes. The machine was tireless, consistent, and highly effective at inducing the desired paroxysm. For the doctors, it was a triumph of modern medicine. They had successfully automated the cure for hysteria. Here's a truly strange detail about this era of mechanical therapy. The vibrator was just one of a whole host of bizarre contraptions designed to treat patients with water, electricity, and vibration in the grand sanitarium mess of the day. Like Dr. Kellogg's in Battle Creek, you could be subjected to an entire suite of mechanical treatments. There were vibrating chairs that would shake your entire body, supposedly to stimulate circulation. There were douches that would spray you with jets of water from every conceivable angle. And there were even sinusoidal baths where a mild electric current was passed through the water you were sitting in. The vibrator fit perfectly into this landscape of well-intentioned, but ultimately bizarre, mechanical cures. It was seen as a legitimate tool in the arsenal of physical medicine. The use of these devices in a clinical setting was open and widely documented. Doctors wrote papers on the most effective frequencies and application techniques. They presented their machines at world's fairs, right alongside the latest telephone or phonograph. as shining examples of technological progress improving human life. There was no shame or secrecy associated with it because, in their minds, it had been thoroughly stripped of any sensual context. It was simply a tool for treating a disease. The academic conversation around these objects is rich and complex. To a medical historian, they are artifacts of a specific moment in scientific thinking, revealing a fascination with the nervous system and a belief in mechanical solutions. To a gender historian, they are symbols of how the female body was objectified and mechanized by a male-dominated profession. To a historian of technology, they represent a fascinating case study of how a device's intended purpose can be completely eclipsed by its subsequent social life. All these perspectives are valid. The clinical vibrator is an object that sits at the crossroads of multiple histories. For you, the patient, the experience is even more detached than before. The doctor no longer even needs to touch you directly. He is an operator, a technician running a machine. The low, powerful hum of the device fills the room, a sound of impersonal efficiency. The treatment is quicker, more predictable, and just as confusing. The result is the same as sudden, overwhelming physical release, followed by that now familiar sense of common dislocation. You are being cured by a machine, a noisy, steam-powered little helper that represents the very pinnacle of modern medical science. But this helper is about to escape the confines of the clinic. The clinical vibrator, that noisy, industrial beast of the doctor's office, was too effective and too intriguing to remain a professional secret for long. Like many technologies of the era, from the sewing machine to the telephone, it was destined for a second life. A migration from the specialized world of the professional to the optimistic, consumer-driven world of the home. The machine was about to get a makeover. The transition began as electricity started to become a common feature in middle-class households. This new, clean power source made it possible to create smaller, more portable versions of the vibrator. The heavy, steam-powered behemoths of the clinic gave way to sleek, nickel-plated, handheld devices that could be plugged into a light socket. They were still marketed as medical devices, but now they were for personal, in-home use, and the marketing was brilliant in its sheer, wholesome audacity. You start seeing the advertisements in the back pages of popular, respectable magazines aimed directly at women, like the Ladies' Home Journal. These ads are a masterclass in suggestive innocence. They never, ever hint at the device's most effective application. Instead, they present the vibrator as an all-purpose health and beauty aid, a miraculous cure-all for the modern family. The ads feature elegant, smiling women in high-collared blouses, calmly applying the vibrator to their forehead to cure a headache, or to their throat to improve their singing voice. An illustration might show a woman using a special attachment to massage her scalp, promoting thick, lustrous hair growth. Other ads promise to smooth away wrinkles, develop a fuller bust, or relieve the pain of rheumatism, neuralgia, and backache. One particularly ambitious ad might show the whole family enjoying the benefits: father soothing his sore muscles after a long day at the office, mother finding relief from her nervous exhaustion, and even the children having their limbs gently vibrated to promote healthy development. Here's a wonderfully absurd detail from this advertising blitz: many of these home vibrators came with an entire booklet of instructions, showcasing dozens of potential users. These manuals are a goldmine of pseudoscience. They would include detailed diagrams of the human body, showing you exactly where to apply the vibrator to treat anything from a common cold to deafness. They often came with a whole suite of bizarre attachments: soft rubber cups for the face, hard knobs for deep muscle work, and even rectal and vaginal probes, which was soberly described as being for the treatment of hemorrhoids, constipation, or uterine prolapse. The one thing the manual never mentioned was the one thing the device was exceptionally good at. It was the great, unspoken selling point. The marketing language was always focused on health, vitality, and a very modern, scientific-sounding concept of vibration. Vibration is life, one ad proclaimed. Another promised to bring the roses back to your cheeks. The devices were given respectable, confidence-inspiring names like the Vibrator, the White Cross, or the Embark, associating them with cleanliness, medical authority, and wholesome reliability. They were sold as essential pieces of home health equipment, as necessary as a thermometer. Historians who study advertising and consumer culture find this period fascinating. It was a moment when a product's true function was so taboo that an entire, elaborate fiction had to be constructed around it. The vibrator was sold through a brilliant campaign of mystery. Everyone involved, from the manufacturer to the advertiser to the consumer, was participating in a collective, unspoken agreement not to say what the product was really for. Is it possible that many women bought these devices in genuine innocence, hoping to cure their headaches? Absolutely. But it's also highly probable that word of mouth and shared experience created a sub-rosa understanding of the device's true health benefit. This is a point of debate: how much was known, and by whom. So the machine has completed its journey. It was born from the tired hands of doctors, grew up as a piece of industrial equipment in the clinic, and has now matured into a friendly, accessible home appliance. You, the woman who was once a patient being treated by a specialist, can now purchase the cure and administer it yourself, in the privacy of your own bedroom. The ads promise you relief from all your nervous troubles. They promise health, beauty, and vitality. They have successfully domesticated a medical procedure, turning it into an act of personal, private consumption. The little helper has come home. The arrival of the home vibrator and the ongoing regimen of doctor-prescribed therapies create a strange new normal for you. Your hysteria is being managed. The acute crises are less frequent, replaced by a low-grade, medicated calm. But what happens when this management isn't enough? What happens when the fundamental problem, your personality, your intellect, your discontent refuses to be smoothed away by bland diets, info-stress, and mechanical vibrations? What happens when you are deemed incurable? For some women, their treatments work, at least on the surface. They learn the rules of the game. They learn to perform the role of the recovering patient, displaying the expected docility and gratitude. They return to their lives as wives and mothers, perhaps quieter and more subdued, the spark of rebellion effectively extinguished. They have been successfully cured because they have been successfully broken. But for you, the restlessness remains. Perhaps you start reading again, hiding books under your mattress. Perhaps you engage in another unfeminine debate, or express a desire that falls outside the bounds of your prescribed rule. Maybe the weeping spells return, or the suffocating feeling of anxiety. From your perspective, you are simply being human. From the perspective of your family and your doctor, you are having a relapse. The treatments are failing. The doctor's tone changes. His paternalistic concern hardens into frustration. He has applied the full force of modern medical science, and you have failed to respond appropriately. You are a difficult case, a stubborn one. The diagnosis shifts from a simple case of hysteria to something more severe: intractable hysteria. This new label carries a more ominous weight. It implies that your condition is not just a temporary imbalance but a deep-seated, perhaps permanent, flaw in your character. This is the point where the cures begin to escalate, moving from the merely restrictive to the genuinely terrifying. The doctor might try more powerful sedatives, drugs that leave you in a fog for days, blurring the edges of your reality. He might suggest more extreme forms of hydrotherapy, being wrapped in ice-cold sheets or subjected to high-pressure jets of water. These treatments are framed as being more potent, designed to shock your system back into a state of compliance. But they feel punitive. They feel like a punishment for your failure to get well. The conversations between your father and the doctor now contain a new word, spoken in hushed, grave tones. The asylum, the mental asylum, or sanitarium, is presented as the last resort, a place for cases like yours. It's described as a safe haven, a therapeutic institution where you can receive constant, specialized care away from the stresses of home life. They will use words like retreat and hospital to soften the reality. They will promise you that it is the best, then perhaps only, option for your recovery. Here's a chilling historical detail about this process. The legal power to have a person committed to an asylum was often unterrifyingly broad. In many places during the 19th century, a husband or father could have a woman institutionalized with the signed agreement of just one or two doctors. The woman herself often had no legal recourse. She could be declared insane based on a diagnosis of hysteria, and her freedom could be taken away with the stroke of a pen. Stories from the era abound of women being committed for reasons as flimsy as disobedience, novel reading, or religious excitement. The threat of the asylum becomes the ultimate love control. It hangs over you, a terrifying possibility that dwarfs all previous treatments. The choice presented to you, implicitly or explicitly, is simple: conform, or be removed from society. Be the placid, obedient woman they want you to be, or be locked away. Historians still grapple with the motivations behind these commitments. Were they acts of malice? A convenient way to get rid of a troublesome wife or daughter sometimes. Yes, the story of Elizabeth Packard, who was committed by her husband for disagreeing with his religious views and went on to become a major reformer, is a stark example of this abuse. But in many cases, the families genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They were exhausted, frightened by the woman's behavior, and trusted the absolute authority of the doctor. They saw the asylum not as a prison, but as a place of healing. The final, desperate hope for a cure. The walls are closing in, the options are dwindling. The path you are on is narrowing, and it leads to a place surrounded by high walls and locked doors. The world has judged you, found you wanting, and is now preparing to cast you out. The failure is not the treatment's, the failure is yours, and your sentence is about to be carried out. The word asylum conjures images of Gothic horror, but when you arrive, the building itself might look deceptively peaceful. It's often a grand Victorian structure set in sprawling, manicured grounds, far from the noise of the city. The architecture is intentional, part of a philosophy known as moral treatment. The idea was that a calm, beautiful, and orderly environment could help soothe a disordered mind. The facade is one of therapeutic serenity, a country estate for the mentally unwell. This placid exterior is the asylum's first and most profound lie. Once you pass through the heavy oak doors, the reality of the institution closes in around you. The first thing you notice is the sound of keys. The clicks and jangles of locks are the constant, rhythmic soundtrack of this new world. Doors are always locked behind you. A friendly-seeming nurse guides you down a long, polished hallway, her keys jingling at her waist. A constant reminder of who has the freedom to come and go, and who does not. You are stripped of your identity almost immediately. Your fashionable clothes are taken away, replaced by a shapeless, drab uniform of coarse cotton. Your personal belongings, your hairpins, your small keepsakes, even your name are put aside. You become a case, referred to by your diagnosis or a number. This is the beginning of a systematic process of depersonalization, designed to break down your individual will and make you more manageable. Your life is now governed by the ringing of a bell. The bell signals when to wake, when to eat, when to work, when to walk in the yard, and when to sleep. Every moment of your day is scheduled and supervised. There is no privacy. You sleep in a long ward with dozens of other women, their sighs and murmurs filling the night. You eat your meals in a vast, echoing dining hall, the food even blander and more institutional than what you had at home. The moral treatment of the asylum's philosophy quickly reveals itself to be a rigid system of control. You are now surrounded by the other incurable women. Some are in a state of deep, silent melancholy. Others talk to themselves or cry out in distress. Some are here for melancholia, some for mania, and many, like you, for intractable hysteria. You see in their faces the same confusion and despair that you feel in your own heart, but you are discouraged from forming bonds. Meaningful friendships are seen as a potential source of disruption, another form of unhealthy excitement. Here is a truly heartbreaking detail about asylum life. Many asylums were run as self-sufficient enterprises. which meant that the patients provided the labor. You would be assigned tasks based on your perceived stability. You might spend your days in the laundry, scrubbing sheets and steaming vats, or in the sewing room, mending uniforms, your hands raw and tired. This work was called occupational therapy, framed as a way to give you purpose and prevent idleness. But in reality, you have become a source of unpaid labor, your confinement serving an economic purpose for the institution. The treatments within the asylum are a more concentrated and often more brutal version of what you have already experienced. Hydrotherapy is common, but it can involve being forcibly submerged in ice cold or scalding hot baths for long periods. You might be restrained for hours or days at a time in a calming straitjacket or strapped to a bed. Heavy sedatives are used liberally to manage difficult patients, keeping the wards quiet and orderly. The goal is no longer to cure you, it is to manage you, to render you docile and invisible. The historical understanding of these institutions is complex and often grim. There's a persistent debate about the intent versus the reality. The founders of the first asylums were often genuine reformers, horrified by the conditions of the old madhouses where the mentally ill were chained in dungeons. They truly believed in moral treatment and the power of a therapeutic environment. However, chronic underfunding, overcrowding, and a lack of effective treatments meant that these utopian ideals almost invariably crumbled. The asylums became custodial warehouses, places to hide society's inconvenient members, your own included. The road to this particular hell was paved with good intentions. You look out the barred window of the ward at the beautiful, serene grounds. You can see the gardeners tending the roses, the visitors strolling along the gravel paths. It's a perfect picture of tranquility, but you are not part of it. You are on the inside, looking out. The high walls of the asylum were not built to keep the world out, they were built to keep you in. This is the end of the line for a woman who felt too much, thought too much, and refused to fit neatly into the box society had built for her. But even in a place as hopeless as this, the seeds of a new kind of talking, a new kind of listening, were beginning to be sown, far away in the drawing rooms of Vienna, where you are lost in the institutional greyness of the asylum. A different kind of story is unfolding in a respectable home in Vienna. It's a story that will ultimately do more to dismantle the concept of hysteria than any medical device or hydrotherapy bath. It revolves around a single patient, a young woman whose case would become one of the most famous in the history of psychology. Her name is Bertha Penheim, but the world would come to know her by the pseudonym her doctor gave her, Anna O. You don't know her, of course, but her experience runs parallel to yours, a strange echo across Europe. Anna O. was a bright, imaginative, and fiercely intelligent young woman from a wealthy family not unlike you. And, like you, she began to exhibit a baffling array of hysterical symptoms after a period of intense emotional strain while nursing her dying father. She developed a nervous cough, paralysis in her limbs, disturbances of vision and speech, and periods of profound confusion. She was a classic case of severe hysteria. A puzzle for her attending physician, a distinguished doctor named Joseph Brewer. Brewer was at a loss. The standard treatments weren't working. But he was a compassionate and patient man, and he did something that was, at the time, quite radical. He listened. He started visiting them every day, not just to examine her, but to sit with her and let her talk. During her periods of absence or self-hypnosis, Anna would begin to tell stories. They were dark, poetic, and deeply sad, like fairy tales from a troubled mind. Brewer noticed something remarkable. When she was able to narrate the story of a particular symptom's origin, connecting the feeling of disgust, for instance, to a specific memory of a dog drinking from her water glass, the symptom itself would disappear. Anna herself seemed to understand what was happening. She called these daily talking sessions her chimney sweeping. She also, more soberly, dubbed it the talking cure. It was a process of lancing a psychological wound with words, of bringing a buried, painful memory into the light of conscious expression and, in doing so, robbing it of its power. This was a revolutionary idea. It suggested that her physical symptoms were not random biological malfunctions, they were stories that her body was telling because her conscious mind could not. Here's a small but pivotal detail of the case: Anna O was not a passive patient. She was an active collaborator in her own treatment. It was she who insisted on the daily schedule of talks, she who coined the very term talking cure. This stands in stark contrast to your own experience, where treatments are done to you. Anna was, in a sense, inventing her own therapy, guiding her doctor toward a new way of understanding her suffering. She was taking back a small piece of her own narrative. Brewer was fascinated but also unnerved by the process. The talking cure was emotionally intense for both patient and doctor. As Anna's symptoms improved, her attachment to Brewer grew stronger, a phenomenon he found deeply unsettling. He eventually terminated the treatment abruptly, feeling it had become too complicated and personal. But he had witnessed something extraordinary, and he couldn't shake it. He shared the strange case of Anna O with a younger, ambitious colleague. This colleague was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly captivated by Brewer's story. He saw in the talking cure not just a fluke, but the key to a whole new science of the mind. He believed that the hidden, forgotten stories Anna told were not unique to her, but were a fundamental part of the human condition. His name was Sigmund Freud. The historical debate around Anna O is immense. Was she truly cured by the talking cure? Modern analysis of her case notes and later life suggests she continued to suffer from nervous ailments for years. Some scholars even question the accuracy of Brewer's account, suggesting he may have embellished the success of his treatment. But the literal truth of her cure is, in some ways, less important than the legend it created. The story of Anna O, whether wholly accurate or not, became the founding myth of psychoanalysis. It was the patient's era of a theory that would change the world. While you are being silenced by the institutional routine of the asylum, Anna O is finding her voice, however fragmented and painful. Her chimney sweeping is a tiny, flickering candle in the vast darkness of how hysteria is understood. It's the first whisper of an idea that will grow into a roar, the idea that the cure for this suffering lies not in restraining the body, but in liberating the story trapped within it. A new chapter was beginning, and it would be written not on a prescription pad, but on a psychoanalyst's couch. The story of Anna O, as told by Brewer, lands in the fertile mind of Sigmund Freud and begins to grow into a radical new theory. Freud is a neurologist by training, steeped in the same 19th century medical tradition as the doctors who have been treating you. He understands the nervous system, the brain, and the conventional wisdom about hysteria. But he is a visionary, and he is looking for a bigger, more elegant explanation for human suffering. The talking cure provides him with the crucial clue. Freud takes Brewer's initial observations and expands them into a grand, overarching theory of the human mind. He proposes that the conscious mind, the part of you that thinks, reasons, and interacts with the world, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies a vast, turbulent, and powerful realm he calls the unconscious. This is where your deepest desires, your most primal fears, and your most painful memories are stored, hidden away from your waking self. According to Freud, your hysterical symptoms are not caused by a wandering womb or a depleted nervous system. They are messages from the unconscious. He argues that when you experience something traumatic, an event or a feeling so painful that your conscious mind cannot cope with it, you repress it. You push it down into the dark basement of your unconscious. But the emotional energy of that memory doesn't just disappear. It festers, and eventually, it finds a way to express itself. Since it can't come out as a conscious thought, it converts into a physical symptom. A paralyzed arm might not be a neurological problem, it might be the physical manifestation of a repressed desire to strike someone. A nervous cough might be the body's attempt to choke back unspoken, forbidden words. This is a seismic shift in thinking. Freud is moving the cause of hysteria from the body to the mind, from gynecology to psychology. He is essentially telling the medical establishment you've been looking in the wrong place. The problem isn't a faulty organ, it's a painful story that has been buried alive. And this is where his theory gets particularly controversial and, for the society of his time, scandalous. Freud argues that the vast majority of these repressed traumatic memories are sexual in nature, often stemming from childhood experiences. Here's a small but hugely significant detail of Freud's early work. His initial theory, known as the seduction theory, proposed that his hysterical patients were suffering from the repressed memories of actual childhood sexual abuse. This was a shocking and deeply unpopular idea in the buttoned-up world of Vienna. It implicated the respectable fathers and uncles of his patients, faced with social ostracism and disbelief from his colleagues. Freud later revised his theory. He proposed that these memories were not necessarily of real events, but were fantasies, wishes, and desires originating from within the child's own mind. This revision is one of the most hotly debated moments in the history of psychology. Did Freud abandon his seduction theory because he genuinely believed it was wrong? Or did he buckle under social pressure? Critics argue that this pivot was a catastrophic failure of nerve, a moment when he chose to protect the reputation of the patriarchal family structure, rather than believe the stories his female patients were telling him. Supporters argue it was a necessary theoretical refinement, leading to his more complex and enduring ideas about the Oedipus complex and the power of unconscious fantasy. Either way, the focus remained on a hidden, sexualized secret at the heart of the hysteric suffering. Freud's new model is revolutionary. It offers a way to understand the bizarre and seemingly random symptoms of hysteria as having a deep, personal meaning. He is offering a grammar for the language of suffering. He is suggesting that you are not simply broken, you are haunted. Your symptoms are not nonsense, they are a form of code. And he, the psychoanalyst, is the master codebreaker. For you, locked away in the asylum. This is all just academic theory happening in a city you've never seen. But it's a theory that will eventually trickle down and transform the very ground on which your diagnosis stands. It challenges the entire medical framework that has defined your life. Freud is arguing that the cure is not to silence you, but to make you speak. He is building a new kind of clinic, one without hydrotherapy beds or vibrating machines. It will be a quiet room, with just a chair, a notebook, and his most iconic piece of furniture, the psychoanalytic couch. Freud's new theory gives rise to a new kind of treatment, and with it, a new kind of therapeutic space. The focus of the cure shifts definitively from the examination table to the analyst's couch. This isn't just a change in furniture, it's a profound reorientation of where the illness is located and how it should be approached. The body, for so long the primary target of intervention, is now seen merely as the stage on which a deeper, psychological drama is being enacted. The process of psychoanalysis, as developed by Freud, is the talking cure made systematic. You, as the patient, are invited to lie down on the couch. This posture is intentional, it's meant to encourage a state of relaxation and relaxation, allowing thoughts to drift out from the unconscious without the self-censorship that a face-to-face conversation might entail. The analyst, meanwhile, sits behind you, out of your line of sight. He is a disembodied, listening presence, a blank screen onto which you can project your deepest feelings. Your task is simple in theory but incredibly difficult in practice. You are to say everything that comes into your mind, no matter how trivial, embarrassing, or nonsensical it seems. This is the fundamental rule of psychoanalysis. The goal is to bypass the conscious censor and allow the raw material of the unconscious to spill out in a stream of words, jokes, slips of the tongue, and fragmented memories. The analyst listens for patterns, for recurring themes, for the hidden connections that reveal the story buried beneath the surface. This is a radical departure from every medical encounter you have ever had. The doctor is no longer the one with all the answers. The knowledge needed for the cure is not in his medical books, it is inside you. He is not a technician fixing a machine, he is an archaeologist, carefully brushing away the dust of years of repression to uncover the lost city of your past. For the first time, your personal story, your dreams, your childhood, your secret thoughts is not just relevant, it is the entire point of the treatment. However, While this new approach seems to grant you a voice, it's a voice that is still being filtered through a very specific and very male, interpretive lens. Freud and his followers, who are almost exclusively men, believe they have discovered the universal grammar of the human psyche. They have the key to unlock your secrets. And that key is their theory, a theory built around concepts like the Oedipus complex, penis envy, and castration anxiety. Here's a small but revealing detail about the power dynamic in the psychoanalytic setting. The analyst is the ultimate arbiter of meaning. You provide the raw data, your words, but he provides the interpretation. If you talk about your difficult relationship with your mother, he might see it as evidence of an unresolved Electra complex. If you describe a dream about a tunnel, he will likely interpret it as a phallic symbol. If you disagree with his interpretation, he has a ready-made explanation for that. You are resisting. Your disagreement isn't a valid intellectual point, it's a defense mechanism. Further proof that his interpretation has hit upon a painful, repressed truth. The system is, once again, perfectly circular. This is where the historical debate becomes fiercely critical, particularly from a feminist perspective. While psychoanalysis gave women's inner lives a new and unprecedented seriousness, many scholars argue that it simultaneously created a new, more sophisticated cage. It replaced the biological determinism of the wandering womb with a psychological determinism. Women were no longer seen as prisoners of their uterus, they were prisoners of their supposedly innate, neurotic, and sexually frustrated natures. The problem of being a woman was simply given a new, more complex vocabulary. The fundamental assumption that a woman's discontent was a sign of her own internal pathology, rather than a reasonable response to a patriarchal society, remained largely intact. So, the focus of medicine has shifted from your pelvis to your past, from your body to your biography. The tools of the trade have changed from the speculum and the vibrator to the couch and the notebook. You are finally being listened to, your story finally being heard. But it is still a man who is telling you what your story means. He is the one writing the dictionary for your private language. The talking cure has given you a voice, but the power to define the meaning of your words still lies in someone else's hands. And for the most difficult cases, the ones that even psychoanalysis couldn't seem to touch, the old way of thinking, the belief in a physical problem demanding a physical solution, was about to make a terrifying comeback. While Freud and his disciples were busy mapping the unconscious in the quiet consulting rooms of Vienna, another branch of medicine was pursuing a far more direct and far more brutal solution to the problem of the difficult woman. This was the world of surgery, and its practitioners were men of action, not of words. They looked at the complex theories of psychoanalysis with skepticism. Why search for a buried memory when the source of the trouble, as they saw it, was a physical organ you could hold in your hand? Their logic was a chillingly simple extension of the old ideas. The female hysteria, emotional instability, and all manner of unfeminine behavior stemmed from the ovaries and the uterus. Then the most logical and permanent cure was to simply remove them. This was not a fringe theory. It was a mainstream surgical movement that gained enormous momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The procedure was called a normaloformectomy, the removal of healthy, non-diseased ovaries, and it was hailed as a modern medical miracle. The leading advocate for this procedure in America was a surgeon named Dr. Robert Batty. He argued forcefully that the ovaries exerted a tyrannical, morbid influence over a woman's entire nervous system. He believed they were the root cause of not only hysteria, but a whole host of other disorders, including nymphomania, masturbation, and even a simple refusal to obey one's husband. His solution was decisive and permanent to cut out the root of the problem. Imagine the scenario. You have been deemed an intractable case. The rest cure, the vibrators, perhaps even a stay in the asylum have all failed to make you well. Your family is desperate. The surgeon presents this new option, not as a barbaric mutilation, but as a cutting-edge, life-saving procedure. He uses the language of scientific progress. He speaks of restoring you to a state of calm femininity by removing the organs that produce your disruptive passions. for a husband or father at his wit's end. This promise of a permanent fix could be incredibly seductive. This surgical impulse was fueled by two major developments of the era: anesthesia and antiseptic practices. For the first time, surgeons could open up the abdominal cavity with a greatly reduced risk of the patient dying from shock or infection. This newfound power created a period of what some medical historians call surgical mania. There was a palpable excitement about what could be fixed with a knife, and the female pelvic organs became a primary and tragically popular target for this new surgical enthusiasm. Here's a particularly disturbing detail that highlights the ideological, rather than scientific, basis for these operations. Surgeons would often perform the procedure for reasons that had nothing to do with health. Case notes from the period show women being recommended for an oophorectomy for erotic tendencies, for attempting to leave their husbands, or for being too uppity and intellectual. One doctor famously recommended the surgery for his own wife's sister because she was a great trial to her husband. The operation was being used as a tool of social control, a surgical punishment for women who deviated from their prescribed roles. It was the ultimate, irreversible method for enforcing conformity. The historical debate here is less a debate and more a consensus of condemnation. Modern medicine views the practice of normal oophorectomy as a horrific chapter in the history of gynecology, a stark example of surgical overreach fueled by misogyny and flawed science. Historians see it as the logical, brutal endpoint of a medical tradition that had, for centuries, located a woman's value and her problems in her reproductive capacity. If her destiny was to be a wife and mother, then a woman who failed at or rejected that role was, by definition, pathologically flawed. Removing the organs of that destiny was a way of surgically enforcing that failure. You are presented with this choice. It is framed as the final hope for a cure, the one thing that might finally bring you peace. But it's not really a choice. It's the culmination of a long process that has systematically stripped you of your agency. Your body has been diagnosed, managed, and confined. Now, it is about to be permanently altered. The surgeon is sharpening his scalpel, ready to perform the most profound act of medical authority, yet to cut away a part of you in an attempt to save you from yourself. The surgery itself is cloaked in the sterile, white authority of the modern hospital. You are put to sleep with ether or chloroform, blissfully unaware of the procedure. When you wake up, you are in a haze of pain and confusion. The surgeon, on his rounds, will visit you and declare the operation a success. The offending organs have been removed. The source of your turmoil has been excised. You have, in his eyes, been cured. The reality of what has been done to you, and what it will mean for the rest of your life, will unfold slowly and cruelly. The first and most immediate consequence is a surgically induced menopause. By removing your ovaries, the surgeon has abruptly cut off your body's supply of estrogen and other essential hormones. A natural menopause is a gradual process that takes place over years. Yours happens overnight. The physical effects are violent and extreme. You are plunged into a maelstrom of hot flashes, night sweats, heart palpitations, and dizzy spells. Your body, which was already a source of confusion and distress, now feels like a completely alien landscape. But the physical symptoms, as debilitating as they are only part of the story. The psychological and emotional fallout is devastating. You experience mood swings of a severity you have never known before, swinging from a deep, bottomless depression to fits of uncontrollable rage or weeping. You are plagued by a crushing fatigue that no amount of rest can alleviate. The very nervous symptoms the surgery was meant to cure are now magnified 100-fold, a direct and predictable result of the hormonal chaos unleashed in your body. Here's a small, tragic detail that underscores the ignorance of the time because the architects of this procedure had such a poor understanding of the endocrine system. They often dismissed these post-operative symptoms. If a woman complained of crippling depression after her oophorectomy, it wasn't seen as a consequence of the surgery. Instead, it was often interpreted as proof that her hysterical nature was so deeply ingrained that even the removal of her ovaries couldn't fully eradicate it. The cure created a new set of symptoms, which were then used to further pathologize the patient. It was a perfect, vicious circle of medical logic. You are now, in the eyes of society and medicine, no longer a complete woman. Your primary biological purpose, as defined by the world you live in, has been taken from you. You will never be a mother. This enforced childlessness carries a heavy social stigma. You are seen as an object of pity, a sterile, hollowed-out version of womanhood. Your identity, which was once so tightly bound to your potential as a wife and mother, has been surgically erased. You are left to figure out who and what you are now. The historical analysis of this practice is, thankfully, unsparing. Scholars point to the tens of thousands of women who were subjected to these operations, their lives irrevocably damaged by a procedure that was based on a foundation of pure misogyny. There is an ongoing effort by medical historians to recover the stories of these women, to give voice to their suffering. Their case files, filled with post-operative complaints of melancholy and grief, are no longer read as evidence of their inherent mental instability, but as harrowing testimonials to the devastating consequences of the surgery. They are finally being seen not as failed patients, but as victims of a flawed and brutal medical ideology. As you slowly recover from the physical trauma of the operation, you are left to live in the wreckage. You are a stranger in your own body. You feel fragmented, disconnected. The restlessness and intellectual curiosity that first set you on this path may still be there, but they are now buried under a thick layer of physical pain and profound emotional loss. You look at yourself in the mirror and see a different person. The world wanted to cure you of your inconvenient womanhood, and in a way, it has succeeded. It has taken a vital part of it from you, leaving you with the quiet, aching silence of its absence. You are no longer whole, and you have a lifetime to live with the pieces. While you are navigating the quiet devastation of your own surgically altered life, a different kind of energy is building in the world outside. It's a collective voice, a rising chorus of women who are beginning to question the very foundations of the world that has defined and confined them. This is the dawn of the first wave feminist movement, and it is a force that will ultimately do more to cure hysteria than any medical intervention. This movement isn't born in a doctor's office or a university lecture hall. It's born in the parlors and church basements where women gather to talk. At first, they talk about temperance, the evils of alcohol and its effect on the family. Then they talk about abolition, the moral imperative to end slavery. And in the process of organizing for these causes, they discover something crucial. They have a voice, and when they speak together, that voice is power. They also notice a glaring hypocrisy. They are fighting for the freedom of others while they themselves have almost no legal or political rights. You start to hear whispers of this new movement. You might see a pamphlet, passed secretly from hand to hand, arguing for a woman's right to own property. You might read a newspaper article, written with scathing sarcasm, mocking a politician who declared that the female brain is too small for a political thought. You might hear about a group of women in a town called Seneca Falls who gathered together and wrote a Declaration of Sentiments, a revolutionary document that rewrites the Declaration of Independence to include women, demanding the right to education, to employment, and, most scandalously of all, the right to vote. These women, the suffragists and reformers, go, by the standards of your doctor, all textbook hysterics. They are agitators. They cause trouble. They are assertive, intelligent, and refuse to be silent. They are everything the angel in the house is not supposed to be, and because of this, they are often ridiculed and pathologized in the mainstream press. They are dismissed as unfeminine, shrill, and, of course, hysterical. Cartoons depict them as angry spinsters with sour faces, a threat to the natural order of the family and the nation. But these women refuse to be silenced by the diagnosis. Instead, they appropriate it. They recognize the label of hysterical for what it is, a weapon used to discredit them, and they challenge it head-on. They don't just argue for the vote, they argue for a woman's right to control her own body and her own health. They are among the first to speak out against the brutal surgical cures and the oppressive nature of the rest cure. They see the connection between their lack of political power and the medical establishment's power over their bodies. Here's a fascinating detail about the intersection of these movements. Many of the early women doctors were ardent suffragists. They had to fight tooth and nail to get into medical school, and once there, they brought a uniquely female perspective to the practice of medicine. They founded their own women's hospitals and clinics, offering a form of care that was often more compassionate and less interventionist. They actively challenged the diagnosis of hysteria, arguing that women's nervous complaints were often the direct result of their stifling social conditions, not some inherent biological flaw. They were, in essence, prescribing social change as the best medicine. The historical debate here is about the movement's scope and limitations. Early feminism was predominantly a white, middle-class movement, and it often failed to address the unique struggles of working-class women and women of color. Its leaders sometimes held views on race and class that are deeply problematic by today's standards. Yet, despite its flaws, it represented a monumental shift in consciousness. It was the first organized, large-scale pushback against the patriarchal structures that had governed Western society for centuries. For you, this movement might feel like something happening in a different universe. You are tired, scarred, and isolated. But the ideas it unleashes begin to seep into the culture, changing the air you breathe. The notion that a woman could be a doctor, a voter, a property owner, these ideas begin to take root. The seeds of feminism are sprouting, pushing up through the cracks in the old, rigid world. They are growing slowly, but they are growing. And they are creating a future in which a woman's restless mind will no longer be seen as a symptom of illness, but as a source of strength. A great, unexpected cataclysm is on the horizon, one that will accelerate this change in ways no one could have predicted. This slow, steady march of the feminist movement is about to be violently accelerated by an event that will shatter the old world order, the First World War. When the great nations of Europe plunge into conflict in 1914, it feels like the end of the world. In reality, it is the death knell for the delicate, gaslit, and rigidly structured society that created and sustained your illness. War changes everything. As millions of men are sent to the trenches, a massive void opens up in the workforce back home. The factories, the farms, the transport systems, the entire engine of the nation cannot run without labor. For the first time, society turns to its delicate and hysterical women not as patients, but as a vital national resource. The angel in the house is called upon to leave her parlor and report for duty. You see the change everywhere. Women who were once confined to domestic roles are now pouring into jobs previously considered exclusively male. You see them driving ambulances, working in munitions factories where their skin sometimes turns yellow from the chemicals, earning them the nickname Canary Girls, and serving as police officers. They are wearing trousers and overalls, their hands becoming calloused, their faces smudged with grease. The old ideal of the fragile, fainting lady of leisure becomes not just outdated, but deeply unpatriotic. The war effort requires strength, competence, and resilience, the very qualities that were once pathologized as unfeminine. A woman who can work a 12-hour shift handling explosive shells can no longer be plausibly described as having a delicate constitution. The entire social and medical narrative that defined you as inherently weak and unstable begins to look absurd in the face of this new reality. The cage has been thrown open, not by a philosopher or a doctor, but by the sheer, desperate necessity of war. This newfound competence and freedom have a profound psychological effect. Women are earning their own wages, living independently, and discovering a sense of purpose and camaraderie they had never known. The vague, restless energy that was once diagnosed as hysteria now has a productive outlet. It's channeled into learning a new skill, contributing to a cause larger than oneself, and navigating a world of newfound responsibilities. Here's a specific, poignant detail that illustrates this shift. The hysterical symptoms that had plagued a generation of women seemed to dramatically decrease during the war years. Doctors noted a surprising drop in cases of female neurasthenia and hysteria. It was as if the illness had evaporated when given a cure that wasn't rest or surgery, but purpose. However, a new kind of patient began to fill the neurological wards. Men, soldiers returning from the front lines, suffering from what was then called shell shock, exhibited the same symptoms: paralysis, tremors, anxiety, nightmares that were once considered the exclusive domain of hysterical women. This development is a crucial turning point, and a subject of intense study by medical and cultural historians. When the same symptoms appeared in men who had endured the horrors of trench warfare, it became impossible to attribute them to a wandering room or a fragile female nature. The cause was clearly psychological trauma. This forced the medical community to reconsider the nature of hysteria itself. If a hero soldier could be hysterical, then hysteria could no longer be dismissed as a feminine weakness. It had to be acknowledged as a legitimate human response to an unbearable experience. This provided a powerful, real-world validation for the theories Freud had been developing. The war ends, and the world is irrevocably changed. The men come home, and many women are pushed out of their wartime jobs to make way for the returning soldiers. But you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. Women have had a taste of freedom, of competence, of a life beyond the domestic sphere. They have proven their worth to the nation, and now they demand their reward. In the years immediately following the war, country after country, including Britain and the United States, finally grants women the right to vote. It is a political acknowledgement of a social reality that the war made undeniable. The world you were born into is gone. The structures have loosened. The definitions have blurred. The diagnosis that shaped and scarred your life is beginning to lose its power. It has been exposed not as a timeless medical fact, but as a product of a specific, and now defunct, cultural moment. The war didn't just defeat armies, it defeated the idea of you as a fragile, pathological creature. The battle was far from over, but the ground had fundamentally shifted. In the wake of the war, as the world struggles to rebuild itself, the medical community begins a slow, painful process of introspection. The certainties of the 19th century lie in ruins, just like the cities of Europe. The old, confident way of looking at the world, and at you, no longer holds. The diagnosis of hysteria, once a cornerstone of neurology and gynecology, starts to crumble under the weight of new evidence and new ideas. The first blow came from the battlefield, with the undeniable reality of shell shock. The sight of decorated soldiers trembling and weeping made the old gendered explanations untenable. The second blow came from the laboratory and the operating theater. A more sophisticated understanding of the endocrine system was emerging. Scientists were beginning to map the complex hormonal symphony that governs the body, and the simplistic idea that the ovaries were just troublemaking organs was replaced by a nuanced appreciation of their vital role in a woman's overall health. The practice of removing healthy ovaries was now seen not as a cure, but as the reckless butchery it always was. The third, and perhaps most significant, blow came from the psychoanalytic movement. Freud's ideas, which were once the radical theories of a Viennese outsider, had gained significant traction and respectability, particularly in America. The talking cure was now a mainstream therapeutic option. The idea that mental distress stemmed from inner conflict and repressed trauma provided a far more compelling and humane explanation for suffering than the vague and insulting notion of a biological female weakness. More and more doctors were starting to listen to their patients' stories, rather than just cataloguing their symptoms. You can feel this shift in the cultural atmosphere. The word hysteria starts to sound old-fashioned, a relic of a more ignorant time. It's still used, but often with a hint of irony or as a casual insult, stripped of its clinical authority. A new vocabulary is entering the public consciousness. Words like neurosis, anxiety, and trauma. These terms are more specific, less gendered, and carry the weight of the new psychological sciences. They describe conditions that anyone, male or female, can experience. Here's a small but telling sign of the changing times. Medical textbooks begin to change. The long, rambling chapters on female hysteria, with their absurd lists of contradictory symptoms, are gradually shortened, revised, and eventually removed altogether. They are replaced by sections on conversion disorders, anxiety neuroses, and psychosomatic medicine. The diagnosis that once defined a generation of women is quietly being erased from the official canon of medical knowledge. It's a slow, bureaucratic process, but it's a definitive retreat. This retreat, however, is not a simple story of scientific progress and enlightenment. The historical debate here is crucial. Did the medical community abandon the diagnosis of hysteria because it had a genuine change of heart and recognized its past mistakes, or did it simply find new, more sophisticated ways to pathologize female discontent? Some critics argue that while the label hysteria disappeared, the underlying attitude did not. A woman expressing anger might no longer be called a hysteric, but she might be diagnosed with a personality disorder. A woman feeling unfulfilled might be prescribed the new mother's little helper tranquilizers like Valium to soothe her anxieties and help her adjust to her domestic role. The old biases were remarkably resilient, simply recloaking themselves in modern, scientific language. The fundamental tendency to treat a woman's emotional distress as an individual failing, rather than as a potential response to her social or relational environment, persisted. The power dynamic between a predominantly male medical establishment and a female patient population did not vanish overnight. Still, the change is real and significant. The old monolithic diagnosis of hysteria, that great, shadowy wardrobe that could accommodate any and all female behavior, has been dismantled. It has been broken down into 100 smaller, more precise, and less overtly sexist diagnostic categories. This fragmentation is a form of progress. It allows for a more nuanced understanding of individual suffering. It means that you, or a woman like you, presenting with anxiety and a love of novels in this new era, would no longer be seen as suffering from a disease of your womb. You would be seen as a person with an anxiety disorder, a person whose mind, not her gender, was the focus of the inquiry. The self-doubt that plagued the medical world in the post-war years has done its work. The old god is dead, hysteria, the diagnosis that dominated the medical imagination for centuries, is breathing its last. It's about to be officially buried, taken out of the book for good. The final, official death of your old diagnosis comes not with a bang, but with a quiet, bureaucratic decision made by a committee. The battleground is a book, a volume that may sound dry and academic, but holds immense power over how society understands mental health. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. This is the Bible of American psychiatry, the official handbook used by clinicians to diagnose mental health conditions. To exist in the DSM is to be a real, recognized illness. To be removed from it is to be relegated to the dustbin of medical history. Throughout the mid-20th century, the legacy of hysteria had lived on in the DSM, scattered and disguised under new names. You could find its ghost in diagnoses like hysterical neurosis, conversion type, which described the classic physical symptoms like unexplained paralysis or blindness. You could see its shadow in hysterical personality, a label for women deemed overly dramatic, attention-seeking, and emotionally volatile. The language was more modern, but the old stereotypes were still rattling around in the subtext. The push for the final erasure of hysteria came from a confluence of forces. The second wave feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s was a major driver. These new feminists were fierce, organized, and armed with a sophisticated critique of how medical and psychiatric institutions pathologized women. They organized protests, wrote scathing books and articles, and lobbied professional organizations. They argued that diagnoses like hysterical personality were not scientific categories but tools of social control. Sexist labels used to punish women who didn't conform to passive, feminine norms. They put the psychiatric establishment on the defensive. Simultaneously, within psychiatry itself, There was a push for a more scientific and evidence-based approach to diagnosis. A new generation of psychiatrists wanted a manual that was based on observable, verifiable symptoms, not on vague, interpretive theories inherited from the 19th century. They wanted to move away from the Freudian emphasis on unconscious conflicts and create a system that was more like the rest of medicine, a clear, descriptive checklist of criteria. Hysteria, with its baggage of ancient myths and subjective interpretations, was a prime candidate for elimination in this new, streamlined, scientific model. The critical moment arrives in 1980, with the publication of the third edition of the DSM, known as DSM-II. This edition represented a revolutionary overhaul of the entire diagnostic system. A committee of experts reviewed every single diagnosis, debating its validity and utility, and when they came to hysteria, they made a landmark decision. Here's a specific detail of that process that highlights the shift. The diagnosis of hysterical personality was thrown out. It was replaced by a new, and supposedly more neutral, diagnosis: histrionic personality disorder. The criteria were similar: a pattern of excessive emotionality and attention-seeking, but the committee made a deliberate effort to create a label that could, in theory, be applied to men as well as women. The explicitly female-coded word hysterical, with its ancient link to the womb, was finally gone. The classic physical symptoms were also recategorized under conversion disorder, a term that acknowledged the psychological origin without resorting to the loaded language of the past. This was it. The official end. The word hysteria, which had been used for over 2,000 years to explain, control, and silence women, was now formally obsolete in the lexicon of American psychiatry. It had been officially declared a medical ghost. Of course, the debate about this moment is complex. Did removing the word solve the problem? Critics, particularly from a feminist perspective, would argue that it was a cosmetic change. Histrionic personality disorder, for example, continued to be diagnosed overwhelmingly in women. The underlying biases didn't just vanish because a word was changed. The tendency to pathologize women's emotional expression remained, just under a new, more clinical-sounding name. It was a victory, but a partial and complicated one. The ghost of hysteria still haunted the new diagnostic categories. For you, this moment is a distant, abstract vindication. The illness that defined and derailed your life is now no longer considered an illness at all. It has been deconstructed, its power dismantled, its name struck from the record. It's like discovering that the monster that terrified you as a child was just a shadow on the wall, a trick of the light. The fear was real, the consequences were real, but the monster was not. The world has finally, belatedly, caught up to a truth you always felt in your bones: you were never sick. You were a woman living in a world that was sick. The word is gone from the book. The diagnosis officially retired. You have, in a sense, outlived your own illness. But does the story end there? Does the ghost of hysteria simply vanish because the doctors have agreed to stop using its name? The truth, as you look around the modern world, is far more complicated. The echoes of hysteria are everywhere, resonating in the quiet, subtle ways that women's experiences are still misunderstood, dismissed, and pathologized today. The old biases have shape-shifted, adapting to a new vocabulary and a new era. You see the echo in the doctor's office. Studies have shown that women's reports of pain are often taken less seriously than men's. They are more likely to have their physical symptoms attributed to emotional or psychological causes, to stress, to anxiety, to being overly emotional. A woman who goes to the emergency room with severe abdominal pain is more likely than a man to be given a sedative rather than a painkiller. This is the modern, sanitized echo of the hysteria diagnosis, the reflexive assumption that a woman's physical suffering is probably all in her head. It's the ghost of the wandering womb, now dressed in a lab coat and speaking the language of psychosomatic medicine. You see the echo in the workplace. A man who is assertive, ambitious, and voices his opinions strongly is often described as a leader. A woman who exhibits the exact same traits is at risk of being labeled bossy, aggressive, or difficult. This is the echo of the angel in the house. The expectation that women should be accommodating, nurturing, and quiet still lingers. And those who defy it are penalized. Their personalities framed as problematic. They are no longer diagnosed as hysterical, but they are still seen as causing trouble. You hear the echo in the language used to describe emotions. Men get angry, women get emotional or irrational. A man's passion for a subject is a sign of his dedication, a woman's is a sign of her being overly invested. This is the legacy of a medical and cultural tradition that framed female feeling as inherently unstable and excessive. Here is a specific, modern-day detail that serves as a powerful echo: the fight for recognition of diseases that disproportionately affect women, like endometriosis or fibromyalgia. For decades, millions of women suffering from the excruciating, chronic pain of these conditions were told by their doctors that there was nothing wrong with them, that they were exaggerating, that it was just stress or female troubles. They were, in effect, being diagnosed with a modern form of hysteria. It has taken years of patient-led advocacy, of women banding together and refusing to be silenced, to force the medical establishment to take these conditions seriously and invest in research. This struggle is a direct continuation of the fight that began in your 19th century parlor. The academic conversation around this topic is ongoing and vibrant. Scholars in gender studies and medical humanities trace these hysteria scripts through contemporary culture. They analyze how film, television, and news media portray women's anger, ambition, and pain. They debate whether new diagnostic categories, like premenstrual dysphoric disorder (PMDD), are helpful tools for understanding real suffering or simply new, more sophisticated ways to medicalize normal female experiences. The central question remains the same: how does a society differentiate between genuine pathology and a normal human response to a stressful or unjust world, and who gets to decide? Your long, strange journey, from the cloistered parlor to the asylum ward, from the surgeon's table to this present moment of reflection, has not been in vain. It's a history that needs to be remembered, not just as a bizarre story from a bygone era, but as a cautionary tale. It's a stark reminder of how easily science can be colored by cultural prejudice, and how the authority of medicine can be used to enforce social norms. The struggle to be heard, to be believed, and to have your experience taken seriously is a battle that every generation of women has had to fight. The language changes, the treatments evolve, but the echo of that dismissive diagnosis, "it's just hysteria," is a ghost that has yet to be fully laid to rest. And so, here you are. At the end of this long, winding path through history, you have worn the cost and felt its squeeze. You have been diagnosed, rested, massaged, and mechanized. You have walked the cold, polished floors of the asylum and felt the surgeon's shadow fall over you. You have witnessed the world crack and reform, and you have seen your own illness be born, mature, and finally die a quiet, bureaucratic death. You have survived. Now, what does it all mean? It means you get to take your body back. This is the final, most important act of your story. It's the process of reclaiming the territory that was invaded, mapped, and redefined by others. It starts with the simple, radical act of trusting your own experience. That restlessness you felt in the parlor wasn't a symptom, it was intelligence. Yearning for an outlet. The sadness wasn't a pathology, it was a human heart responding to constraint. The anger wasn't a fit of nerves, it was a righteous spark of defiance. You were never broken. You were a healthy organism reacting to an unhealthy environment. Taking your body back means unlearning the lessons they taught you. It means understanding that your feelings are not symptoms to be managed, but signals to be listened to. They are your internal compass, your most reliable source of information about your world. It means giving yourself permission to be complex, to be contradictory, to be angry and soft, ambitious and tired, all at the same time. You are not a diagnosis, you are a story, rich and layered and entirely your own. It also means looking at the world around you with new eyes. You see the subtle ways the old narratives persist. But now you have a name for them. You can trace their lineage back to the wandering room and the doctor's tired hands. This knowledge is a form of power. It's a shield against the quiet, modern-day dismissals. When someone tells you you're being too emotional, you can hear the faint echo of a 19th century doctor diagnosing hysteria. And you can choose not to believe it. Here's one last detail. A small act of reclamation. Think back to that first, clumsy, steam-powered vibrator in the doctor's office. It was a tool invented by men to fix a problem they had invented in women. It was a symbol of their clinical detachment and their profound ignorance. The journey of that object, from a medical instrument of control to a modern tool of personal pleasure, is a perfect metaphor for this entire story. It's about taking something that was used to define and control you, and reclaiming it for your own purposes, on your own terms. It's a small, worrying piece of historical irony, a symbol of a revolution that happened in the most private of spaces. The history of hysteria is not just a story about women. It's a story about power. It's about who gets to define what is normal and what is sick, who gets to speak, and who is told to be silent, whose story is believed, and whose is dismissed. The struggle against that diagnosis was, and still is, a struggle for the most fundamental human right, the right to earn your own narrative. As you stand here now, free from the labels and the treatments, you can finally feel the simple, profound peace of self-possession. Your body is not a problem to be solved. Your mind is not a territory to be conquered. They are yours. You can breathe deeply now, a sure, unrestricted breath that goes all the way down, with no corset to stop it. The air is different. It's the air of a world that you, and the countless women like you who fought, wept, and endured, helped to create. It's not a perfect world, but it is a world with more room to breathe, and that, in the end, is the only cure that ever truly mattered. And so, the story comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the past begin to fade, softening into the quiet hum of your own room. Feel the weight of your own body, safe and still, the quiet anchor in the here and now. The journey is over. The frantic energy of the 19th century, the cold steel of the clinic, the high walls of the asylum, they all dissolve, melting away like sugar in warm tea, leaving only a profound sense of peace. Let the details of the tale drift away now, like leaves on a slow-moving stream. They are just stories. What remains is the steady, rhythmic cadence of your own breathing, in and out, a quiet tide, pulling the day's last thoughts out to a deep, calm sea. There are no more diagnoses to fear, no more judgments to endure. There is only this stillness, this gentle descent into rest. You are floating now, in that soft, hazy space between wakefulness and dreaming. A place where you are the sole author of your own reality. The world outside can wait. Tonight, this space is yours and yours alone. A sanctuary of perfect, quiet autonomy. Let the last bits of tension release from your shoulders. Your jaw, your hands. Let go. Sleep is a safe harbor, and you are drifting gently toward its shore. The end of the article. Good night.